Gregg Braden, my friends, back by popular demand. This man is a G.
It's amazing watching this world unravel the way that it is unraveling, because it has to. The world that we have known and become familiar with is unsustainable. I think we all know that. And you know, what's interesting is last year, even people that used to deny that anything out of the ordinary is happening are no longer in denial. Now they're in panic.
Gregg is one of the world's leading spiritual teachers, and if you want to have a complete understanding of the hidden forces pushing and doing things from the government to what's ruling your life, Gregg has some crazy info for you. Listen to me, you cannot miss the message that Gregg has for all of us, the divinity that you hold within you, the power that you have not yet unlocked. This man is an absolute baller.
So we are rapidly on a path of giving away our humanness to technology. And people like Elon Musk have brought it to the attention of governments, and he's raised the red flag, but the momentum, and we are all experiencing the consequences of that. And we can talk about that as well.
Leave us a like, comment down below, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and thewayofwilljohn.com is where you can get more exclusive stuff from Gregg. Go check it out, sign up, get our Manifestation Masterclass, and enjoy your life, my friends. We love you here at 11th Commandment. Peace out.
Thewayofwilljohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
Gregg Braden, welcome back. How's it going?
Well, it's so good to be with you. We just talked off camera. It's been just a little less than a year. Man, our world looks a whole lot different right now than it did a year ago. For me personally, I'm coming from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, here in the US. I personally am doing beyond epic, and I'm watching friends and family melt down in a lot of ways, doing my best to be the best version of myself so that I can care for the people that I love. And I think a lot of people are in that situation. It's amazing watching this world unravel the way that it is unraveling, because it has to. The world that we have known and become familiar with is unsustainable. I think we all know that. And you know, what's interesting is last year, even people that used to deny that anything out of the ordinary is happening are no longer in denial. Now they're in panic. They're saying, what's going on? What caused it, and what can we do to make it better? Those are the questions that people are asking me. You're probably seeing the same thing in your community and with your guests.
Thewayofwilljohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
Yeah, obviously, it's good to have a look at the juxtaposition that a year can make, because it does seem wild. And that's some of the stuff I want to get into. And obviously, as you know, one of the most important things for me, and I know this as a huge follower of your work for a number of years, empowering individuals to then be able to then go out and affect their communities is a huge part of what we do. I mean, we've had such success having guys like you on that are doing such a good job of affecting individuals and empowering them to then go and have a positive influence everywhere. That's where I wanted to start, because you have your background as a geologist, correct?
Yeah, I'm a scientist. My first degree, primary degree, was in the earth science as a geologist. I don't do a lot of geology these days, but the reason that I say that I'm actually a multidisciplinary scientist. So my degree is in geology. I've got a very strong background in the life sciences and math, physics, and computer science. And I say that, Will, because it's that multidisciplinary background that allows me to stay current with the new discoveries, new science. And man, I got to tell you, those discoveries are coming fast and furious. There are journals that used to be published every 30 days, once a month, science journals. And the discoveries are coming so quickly now that they supplement those with weekly newsletters, because they can't wait until the end of the month to release all the new discoveries about our world, discoveries about our bodies, discoveries about human consciousness. And I think what's important for me, the bottom line, we are absolutely not what we have been told. And we're so much more than we've ever been led to believe or allowed to believe, or I could say it stronger, than we have been programmed to believe about ourselves. We've been taught that we are a flawed form of life by virtue of our existence. We, in the scientific community, when they're teaching our kids this in schools today, that by virtue of being born a human, you are a flawed form of life. And among the flaws that they list are things like human emotion. They say clouds our ability to think clearly and to make good decisions and judgment. So human emotion is believed to be a flaw. Human conception, the way that we create life in this world, the way we make a baby, is seen by some in the scientific community as a flaw because it is so imprecise. You never know exactly what you're going to get. And they say, why not use the science that can design the genes and can give you the features, custom features for your child? And all of this falls under the guise, there's a term, and I know some of our viewers are familiar with it, called transhuman, which means the word trans simply means beyond. So we hear trans in a lot of different contexts today, obviously. This means beyond human. And it is the movement to replace the human body with synthetics, with artificial intelligence, chemicals in the blood, artificial immune response, sensors in the skin, wires, in the skin, RFID chips, things like that. And there is a very active movement to do this. The author, Ray Kurzweil, I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's an author. He's also one of the engineers at Google Technology. And he has recently come out with a book that's called The Singularity. And what he is saying is by the year 2035, which really isn't that far away, he said, when you say hello to someone on the street, when you talk to someone on the street, you will no longer be talking to a pure human. You'll be talking to some form of a hybrid of human machine and human AI. And people like Yuval Harari, if you're following the World Economic Forum, he is a popular speaker. He has the ear of a lot of government leaders of nations, is why I even mentioned him. A lot of people listen to his perspectives. He's a historian by nature, but he is a futurist. And he says, unless something changes quickly, I mean, this isn't going to drag on for, 10 more years. He said, unless something changes quickly, we are very probably the last generation of humans, pure humans, that this world will ever know. So I've written about this extensively, and I'm one of the reasons that I am so concerned is that we're about to give away our humanness without even knowing, Will, fully what it means to be human. We're only beginning to understand what it means to be human and what our capacities, what our capabilities are. Once we replace natural features in our bodies, natural biology, once we replace our natural immune system with a synthetic immune system, once we replace neurons in the brain with computer chips, what happens, and I can go through the whole body and talk about synthetic organs, all these things. Once we do that, our body morphs and adapts to that new synthetic addition, and there are parts of us that begin to atrophy. And I'll just give you an example of this. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in 1950s, 1960s in the middle of America, in the state of Missouri. And we were always told back then, I mean, people used to laugh about it, that you're born with X amount of brain cells. And you start losing them from the day that you're born. And every time you drink a beer in college, you're going to lose some brain cells. And that was the leverage, not to drink or smoke or, whatever else it was. And now here's what the new science has found is that we are producing new brain cells until the last breath that we take on this planet. Even at advanced ages, we're producing new brain cells from a part of the brain that is poorly understood, but there's a catch. Unless those new neurons are engaged in a meaningful way, in between about 7 and 10 days, they will atrophy and die because the body feels that they're not needed. That is an example of, in biology, an adage that is called use it or lose it. You know, we've all heard that, and we usually hear it when it comes to geriatric sex, for example, you know, use it or lose it. By the way, which is also possible with us until the last breath that we take. It's a fallacy that these systems fail, but they depend upon the environment that we give them to work with, and we could talk about that. So the point is that unless our systems are used, the body believes this is how we adapt. The body says, oh, well, maybe I don't need this immune system anymore because I've got chemicals doing it for me. Or maybe I don't need these brain cells anymore because I've got AI doing this for me. That's one life. When the next life is produced, then that is passed on through what's called epigenetics. It literally is passed on through the genes, whether or not they're engaged. And the next generation, all of a sudden, things that we used to do become a vestige of what we've done in the past. And this is how you lose a species. It's exactly how you lose a species. So we are rapidly on a path of giving away our humanness to technology. And people like Elon Musk have brought it to the attention of governments, and he's raised the red flag, but the momentum is so great. And honestly, there's another factor at play that wants us to give away our humanness. And we are all experiencing the consequences of that. And we can talk about that as well. So all of these things, these are all factors that are coming into our lives right now. And it's so interesting. I know it's happening, and I'm still in awe at the slick marketing, the sexy marketing that you see on the internet and that you see in books and magazines that entice young people to believe that they are flawed victims of bad biology and that they need something outside of themselves to be the best version of themselves and to compete in the business world or in the athletic world. And they're willing to compromise their bodies and give away their humanness to technology, because if we are victims of a flawed biology, that means we need a savior. And technology is being touted as the savior, and young people have bought into it. And I'm not saying every single one, but I do a lot of live events all over the world, not just in America. And young people all over the world are they are not being given any reason, Will, to appreciate the gift of their humanness, to recognize just how precious a human body and a human life is. They're being taught just the opposite. And it's reflected in the way that they treat their bodies, what they put into their bodies, what they ingest, and what they do outside of their bodies. And I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, or wrong. I'm saying there are consequences to the stories that we tell ourselves. And the stories that we're telling an entire generation of young people is that you're a flawed form of life. You're a carbon-based form of life, and carbon is bad. That's what they're being told. They're being told to hate and fear carbon and to worship technology, AI, and computer chips. So Ray Kurzweil, in this new book, it's a lot of people are asking me to comment on this book. He's saying by the year 2045, we will all be a part of the internet of all things. We will be digitally interwoven into the internet, the cells of our bodies and our biology and all of our metrics. Everything will be digitized. Everything will be run by a massive AI that accounts for our spending habits, what we eat, how much we spend, where we travel. It will account for all of the goods that are produced, all of the goods that are consumed, all of the energy that is consumed. All will be under this massive, they call it the internet of all things, or the singularity. The singularity is where we all are just that. We are all part of this digital network of information.
One of the most important things that I have learned interviewing all of these high performance leaders is that clarity of mind is crucial to your success. And what good is clarity of mind without clarity of sound? Which is why today's podcast is sponsored by Rode. We across 𝗪𝗟𝗟 use exclusively Rode audio equipment in order to do all of our stuff. If you are an influencer, if you're just a person out there trying to make some good content for your stuff at home, wherever it is, Rode is by far the best audio partner we have ever had. We have been using their stuff for almost 5 years now. Has never let us down. Truly incredible company, especially with all of the other affordable things that you guys can get from them. Check out the link right down below and enjoy the rest of this podcast.
The reason I push back on this, I think it's a really bad idea, first of all, but we are more than ones and zeros on a computer hard drive. And our science has not caught up with that idea yet. The scientists still believe if you can capture the neurons, the information that's firing between neurons in the human brain, they think that's consciousness. And if you can put that on a computer chip, then you can preserve that consciousness, and then you are immortal. And when your body dies, that chip can download into another human body or into a robotic body or into some form of life. What they're missing, and this is why our humanness is so important, is that there's a part of us that is not in our bodies. And science, and I'll tell you in a minute how we know this, but science knows this. There's a part of us that's not in the body that is timeless, it is ancient, it is all-knowing. It's where our imagination begins, our creativity, our innovation. It's where our love begins. It's where our forgiveness begins. It's where our healing begins. And that part of us is called our divinity. And where this gets really interesting, if you talk to someone about divinity, and I'm just going to lay this out, and then we can tie into it for the rest of the conversation. If you talk to someone about divinity, they will think it has something to do with religion, because religions were wrapped around this powerful concept. But when you go look at the definition, I just did a whole series, a video series on this.
Would you allow me to say it? Would you allow me to say it? I've done my homework.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Is defined as the ability to transcend perceived human limitations.
Absolutely. So let's break that down. Transcend means it's more than just to survive. It means to become more than. And I think what's really important in that definition, and that's a dictionary definition, what's important is perceived limitations that we placed on ourselves. Will, they may not even be real. Mm-hmm. They are the limitations that we have accepted for ourselves, or that our family or our culture or our society or our religion or our science has programmed us to accept, but they may not even be real. So divinity, a lot of people, when I talk to them, they think this is a peripheral conversation. It's actually front and center, because divinity is what allows us to express the fullness of what it means to be human. And when we embrace our divinity, we fear the change in the world much less. Divinity is what heals our fear. And this is the reason there is a concerted effort to replace our humanness with synthetics, because it's only in this world, it's only through our humanness that we can access our divinity. We access that information. Divinity is a field of information that we access through the antenna of our DNA, the antenna of our cell membranes, the antenna of our neurons. And there's a branch of science now that is looking at the human body much more than wet, sticky, gooey stuff inside of cells. They're looking at us from an IT perspective, information technology. And they're saying, my God, DNA, for example, functions as a fractal antenna that both transmits and receives information. The question is, what are we sending? And when we receive it, where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from this field of information that we have always known in our hearts exists, but science is hard pressed to really prove that it's there. There are experiments they're doing now that are demonstrating that that field is there and that there is something missing in the current model. So this is a big conversation, a big picture. Here we are barreling down the path of this road of change at the close of a great cycle of time. There's an unsustainable world that is buckling and collapsing while a new world is emerging. And there are two forces. There are forces of good and evil, very real good and evil, not just the metaphors, but very real good and evil. That there are some people that don't want us to embrace our humanness, that don't want us to embrace our divinity, because when we do, that's where we are in our power. We're no longer locked into the fear that keeps us vulnerable to the ideas of other people, that keeps us susceptible to the agendas of other people. I know you've got some guests upcoming that are going to talk about those agendas, and we don't have to go into those now unless you want to, but we are less vulnerable when we embrace the deep truth of our divinity. And because there is a battle, this is literally a battle. It's an ancient battle that is unfolding in our lives. And it is a battle, a fundamental battle between good and evil. You know, just a little side note, I just did a presentation on this in Denver, Colorado last week. I think most reviewers are familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest records of the Old Testament. They were discovered 1946, 1947 in Qumran in the Holy Lands, Egypt, and right there in the Dead Sea area, Israel and Jordan, right in that area. They were discovered in 46, 47. The translations were not allowed to be released to the public until 1991, 45 years in there. And you say, well, what could possibly be in those 2,500 plus year old scrolls that would have such an influence in our lives today that we can't share it with the public in the 20th and now the 21st century? And, you know, you can't make this stuff up. Interestingly, the answer was found on the first day of the excavations in the first cave number 1 in Qumran, in the first scroll that was found in the first vase that was there. And it's called the War Scroll, W-A-R, it's the War Scroll. And it describes an ancient battle that we are currently living. And if you don't know it, sometimes you don't recognize that it's happening. But the exact words in those scrolls, it is a battle between what they call the sons of darkness and the sons of light. And that battle will play out until the end of our cycle in time. And we're very close to the end of that cycle. And what's so interesting, it describes 7 battles in total, 3 of them won by the sons of darkness, 3 of them won by the sons of light. That's 6. The 7th one is won by the sons of light, but through the intervention of divine forces and human divinity. So in other words, it is by awakening the full extent of our own power that we transcend this battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. And they didn't want people to know that. And it's interesting because the idea of battle, well, when people think of this, that the idea is that 2 forces are opposing, and one of them has to be stronger than the other to prevail. That's not what this battle is. If you try to fight this battle between good and evil on those terms, you get stuck in the ancient trap that keeps us locked into the battle. We don't want to win, we want to triumph. And there's a difference between winning by opposing the forces and triumphing by transcending the rules of the battle itself. So the question is, how do we triumph in the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light? And the good news is that you don't even have to know that battle is happening. We triumph by living the best version of ourselves. When we live the deep truth and the full truth of what it means to be human, and we love without fear, we forgive without expectation of something coming back to us, when we can imagine and innovate and create without being afraid of what we're imagining, innovating, and creating, when we can share our gifts in this world, that is how we triumph, because the sons of darkness don't want us to do that. They want to prevent us from those fully human expressions. So within that big, now, we covered a lot of ground. Here's the big context. There's a fundamental battle between good and evil, the sons of darkness and the sons of light. It is playing out using fear as a tactic. And we as humans are wired to overcome that fear through our natural biology, because our biology tunes us into the place in the field. And we can talk, there's a lot of science about, there was a peer-reviewed journal, a journal of complementary and alternative medicine, that came out a few years ago, and it said that the human heart, the neural network in the human heart, is literally linked to a field of information that is not bound by the laws of time, space, and physics as we know it today. And think about that. There's a part of us, our physical humanness, not surprisingly, our heart, because the heart has been the heart of so many traditions. But there's something about that neural network. It's an antenna that tunes us to a field of information where time and space are meaningless. This is why a mother in Brisbane, Australia, can have a son on the battlefield in Afghanistan and know that his vehicle has hit an IED and he's in trouble before his commanding officer knows, because she called the commanding officer and said, I just had a feeling that my son's in trouble. And the commanding officer says, no, he's on routine patrol. Everything's fine. She said, no, it's not. How does that happen? Well, we hear stories like that, and we say they're anecdotal. We call it intuition. Now we're beginning to understand we are capable of functioning in a realm where distance makes no difference, and the future and the past and the present are all simultaneous. So that's why our humanness is so important. This is why there's a battle for our humanness. So all the stuff we're seeing happening in the world today, I mean, there's a whole lot going on. We've got wars, potential nuclear wars. We've got religious wars. We have the bonds of families being broken intentionally, the bonds between men and women, between blacks and whites, between Christians and Muslims, between Jews and Muslims, between male and female, between gender. All of these things are important, Will. They're all happening by design to break the social bonds that hold us together so that we become lost and fearful and willing to relinquish our humanness in favor of the technology. When we relinquish that humanness, we relinquish our divinity, and we become vulnerable to the ideas and the agendas of others. So other than that, not much going on. That's what's happening. I want to lay all that out.
Chill.
So we can tie into it. I know other guests that you have go into a lot of detail on specific areas of this, and we can as well.
No, well, so where I wanted to go with this is perfect, because just one of those, let's say, divine things, you're kind of reading my mind.
See how good we are?
I know. I mean, it happens naturally. It's flow.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, of course, that there is essentially a concerted effort to block us from our own divinity.
Yes.
And where I wanted to go with that is, number one, it's a two-part question. And the first is in any situation, you want to understand the situation, right? And you've done a great job of laying out where we are, what's going on. What we haven't touched on is how that concerted effort and who they are and how that manifests, right? Because if I'm hearing fear as a tactic, I understand that the TV is one way to do this, mainstream media, other ways, that they can stay in touch with us. But, the real thing for me is, first, who and how, what is that? And the next point is, what can I personally do specifically? Because where I was going originally with the geologist question is I was learning about environment. I had another guest on who was discussing where you are plays a role in necessarily frequency and vibration have become buzzwords that maybe mean less than they really do. It'd be great to have someone like you break that down. But once I understand who's attacking me and what that looks like, I then want to understand what my reaction, why my reactions, how can that actually affect the world? So maybe you could discuss what we can do.
I'm going to do that first, and I think this is important because we are all experiencing the consequences. We are all casualties of a form of war that most people don't recognize. We are living, the ancient texts talk about a fundamental battle between good and evil, the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. That's one way of couching what's happening here. But it's polarity. There are forces of light and dark, good and evil. And I want to say, when we talk about evil, this is more than a metaphor. When I was a kid growing up, I remember people used to talk about evil like a little red devil would be on your shoulder that had red horns and a pointy tail, and there's an angel over it. And people used to joke about it. The forces of evil, they ebb and flow throughout history. And sometimes they're more apparent, sometimes they're less apparent. Because we are narrowing the timeline, we're very close to the end of a great cycle. Depending on how you look at this, I can talk about it as a geologic cycle. We can talk about it as a cultural cycle. We can talk about it as a cycle of time. I think most people are familiar with the Mayan cycles, 5,125 years. What's interesting, they're all converging. There are conflict cycles, there are solar cycles, there are galactic cycles, there are gamma ray cycles. They're all converging right around that 2030 year mark, 2030. The United Nations has 17 goals that they want to implement in the world, impose in the world by the year 2030. That's not very far away. And to achieve these goals, our whole society has to change. The way we think about money has to change. The way we think about jobs, the way we think about borders, the way we think about self-defense, the way we think about healthcare, all of that has to change. And the UN this is why we're seeing so much happen. There's an intensification as the powers that be are jockeying for position so that they can be in the best possible place when this cycle comes to a close. And by virtue of that, the new cycle begins. So that's why evil now has raised its ugly head. What we saw play out at the Nova Music Festival in Israel on October 7th, almost a year ago, can only be described as pure evil. And I'm going to use this as an example. I was in a hotel room in London preparing to speak on a live stage the morning that happened. And I was getting the live news feeds from Asia, Eastern Europe, India, and the raw news feeds. And I could see what was happening. And because of the time zones, America was asleep. I got back to my hotel room that night and I started checking out CNN, some of the other news feeds. And I want to say, and I want my brothers and sisters to know, America was not allowed to see the truth of what happened in Israel, in the Nova Music Festival. That truth was distorted, it was denied. And based on that, policies and society is reacting. What you're seeing are the protests on the campuses, and I'm not saying 100%, but a lot of them are based, when they do the interviews with these young people who mean well, they say that those are lies, because if those horrible things really happened, we would see the images. Well, the social media algorithms, community guidelines, and the narrative won't allow that. So I'm using this as an example. The way that this battle is being waged right now, and most people are not aware of this, is we are engaged in what is called fifth generation warfare, or 5Gen or 5G. It's not the 5G cell towers. So that's why I don't use that. Fifth generation warfare. This is an insidious warfare. It is a psychological warfare. It is a perception, a warfare of perceptions. that precede any kind of kinetic war. There may be a kinetic war, and we're seeing kinetic war in Ukraine. We're seeing a kinetic war in Israel and Gaza. But before all that happened, there was a psychological war and a war of perceptions. This is by design, Will. And it is by design to break the social bonds that hold us together as societies and communities and families and nations. This kind of warfare is playing out. Now, I'm going to give some specifics so people know how to recognize it so that we are less vulnerable to it. But I'm using what happened in Israel as an example. The same is happening with climate change. Climate change is a fact. It's not happening for the reasons that we're being given. And as a geologist, I can tell you that as a fact, and NASA knows this, and the real scientists, not the pop scientists, but the real scientists know it. So what happens is all of the horrible things, the fires, the floods, the earthquakes, and the suffering is shown in the media. And then there is a guilt that is implied because we put gas in our car, or we use gasoline or natural gas to cook our meal, that we have somehow contributed to that human suffering. And it's not true. It's not supported by the evidence. But these are examples of fifth generation warfare. So there is a battle. All of those things in the fifth generation warfare are important, and I want to acknowledge them, and they need to be talked about. We need to talk about them with kindness in our society. The disparity between the rich and the poor, and between the races and between the religions, all that's important. But ultimately, they have become distractions from the deepest battle, which is the battle for our humanness. Our humanness is on the line because through our humanness, we access our divinity and we free ourselves from the fear. When our humanness is limited, we are vulnerable because we are in fear, and susceptible because we are in fear. All right, so those principles are playing out. They're intensifying because we're nearing this 2030, and it's not like exactly January 1st, 2030, but it's in that time frame. Let me just give you an example. A lot of people remember the 2012 phenomenon with the Mayan calendar.
Of course.
And people, I did an interview in 2012 with a guy in New York, and he said, "Man, what was all this about?" He said, "Nothing happened. When are we going to see some changes on the planet?" And then I did an interview with him recently, and he said, "When are the changes going to stop?" But so let me share that calendar, that 2012 calendar, is still in play, because the cycles of time, they don't end on a dime. There's a buffer of time, and that allows the cycle, one cycle to come to a close, another one to begin. There's an overlap, there's a buffer, and there's a mathematic function that tells us how long that buffer is. I wrote about this in the book Fractal Time. So the buffer for a 5,125 year long cycle is 36 years, 18 years before 2012 and 18 years after. 18 years after 2012 is the year 2030. So we are still living this 2012 phenomenon. Just people don't think about it in that way. So all of the big stuff that keeps people so spun up, because it goes right to the heart of their primal fears and instincts. Very important topics that need to be discussed, but they've been weaponized to divide us, Will, and we all know that. Money, things like gender identification, abortion. I mean, these are all really important social topics, but we should, as a society, be able to come together and talk about them in kindness to achieve a goal. They've been weaponized successfully, and they are dividing us now, all the way down to the family dinner table. I know I have friends and family that this has happened to. So those big things are the diversions. It's really a battle for our humanness, and the transhuman movement is now kicking into high gear because technology is available now that has never been available in the past. So it's this this perfect storm of the convergence of cycles of time, cycles of human consciousness, cycles of human technology, human fear, human greed. All of these things are now converging, and that's what we're living right now. We all feel it, but it's hard to really recognize what's happening unless you look at this big picture. There's an even bigger picture. So let's you and I walk this through together, and then maybe you ask the question, who is they? Who is responsible? So let's take a look at this. First of all, let's look at the planet. There is a movement right now to geoengineer or terraform this planet. All right. I did an experiment at the beginning of 2023, and I went and looked at all of the UN parameters for climate that they hope to achieve. I'm not contesting them. I said, what would Earth look like if we achieved all of those goals? As a geologist, I'm qualified to do that. I was amazed, Will, because what they want to do, they want to drop the CO2 levels down to just a little over 200 parts per million. 185 parts per million is a death sentence for this planet. We drop below 185 parts per million, forests are extinct and many forms of life go extinct. And it's not like you can fine tune that CO2 by 1 or 2% 185 is not far from the 200 220 that they're looking at right now. All right. By doing that, we also drop the temperature. The average temperature of the Earth right now is right around 56 degrees Fahrenheit average. Some colder, some warmer, equator, poles. If we met these goals, Earth would be 10 degrees cooler. So on a geologic map, I said, when was the last time we had these conditions on our planet? Low CO2, cooler temperatures. It was right smack in the middle of a time called the Pleistocene era. The Pleistocene was not good for life. It was not good for humans. Forests died. Many species, especially large mammals, became extinct. Ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, much more than they do right now. So if we meet those goals, it's not good for us as humans. So then the question is, who's it good for? Then you go to the next level, the human level. We are extraordinary, sacred, precious, ancient forms of life that are only begin to blossom into the full potential of what we are. There's a concerted effort to take that away from us, to shield us from our divinity by shielding us from our humanness, to replace us with hard technology rather than us developing our soft technology. I hesitated because we haven't defined that term yet. Hard technology is computer chips, wires, chemicals in the blood. Soft technology is neurons, cell membranes, ion potentials moving across cell walls, information storage in the blockchain of the DNA molecule, literally. So we are a soft technology. And there is a concerted effort to replace our soft technology with hard technology. Well, here's the thing. This is amazing. A lot of people don't realize this. Computer chips, I love tech. I'm a high-tech guy. Computer chips, they are definitely fast. They are definitely efficient, but they will always be limited by the physics of the stuff the chip is made of. If it's made of silicon, the atoms that make silicon will always have the same arrangement, the same geometrical arrangement, the same physical distance that will limit how fast information can move. There is a limit. They will always reach that limit. So here's the kicker. They say, what is the limit of a human neuron when it comes to information? Well, every time scientists believe that they have reached that limit, because we are highly advanced, technologically sophisticated soft technology, here's what happens. They reach that limit on a human neuron, and the neuron does what neurons do. It morphs and adapts to open the gateway to new realms, new dimensions of energy and information that far exceed where it was before. We've seen this with consciousness and brain states. We don't know the upper limit. There probably is no upper limit, because that is how we are designed. Every time we reach that limit, soft technology will morph and adapt to become greater so that it can accept that greater limit. We are not, we've been told. We're so much more than we've been led to believe. So now we've got an effort to change the planet in a way that's not good for us. We have an effort to take away, to steal our humanness and replace it with technology that's not good for us. Who benefits from both of those things? And the answer to that question is the answer to the question you just asked me.
I mean, I can only guess.
Yeah.
I can only guess. But I can't put a name on it. They still last in my head as they, but in an elite group, I can only.
Well, let me just say this. There are no humans that benefit from this because it denies human life-affirming experiences. If you steal our humanness, and you make our planet into something that it hasn't been since the Pleistocene. There were humans alive during the Pleistocene. It was a tough time for humans, a very, very tough time. You can go back, I've got entire YouTube videos on this. You can go back and I'll show you the geologic chart. You can see where the ice was. You can see, how far I'm doing this in the air. The ice sheets in North America were coming down into the lower 48 of the US. They weren't confined, up in the Arctic. So what's happening is, another way of saying this, there's a concerted effort to remake the Earth and remake the human species, both in a way that's not good for humans. That is, when we look at the big picture, and it is a big picture, and I'm going to be the first to admit this is a very different way for some people to think. You're going to have other guests on that are exactly thinking this way. This is why I think it's important to go back. When we look at history, we tend to separate the present day from the past. We say, oh yeah, well, that's ancient history. Well, it is old. It's not obsolete. There's a continuity. We're living a story that we seldom have the opportunity to see the full landscape of that story. We get fragments of the story through religious institutions or scientific institutions, and they're both corrupt. I used to think that science would be the last bastion of truth, and unfortunately, politics and money have come into science, and so the science, in some respect, there are good scientists out there
for sure, but
absolutely, and I know many of them in the industry. They're up against a very corrupt system, and they don't know what to do about it. So and everywhere, even in the church and the religion, there are good people that want to do good things, but all of these systems have been co-opted. Now you go back and look at the big picture. There's a fundamental battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light, the battle between good and evil playing out toward the end of a cycle. And that battle plays out through the technology that's available at the time. So now it is playing out through the technology that allows us to replace the human body, but also to control information and perceptions, because we live our lives, choose our relationships, heal our bodies, pass our laws, embrace our policies based upon our story, the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. So if you can control that narrative, that is a very, very powerful part of, what we're seeing happening here. So as the narratives are controlled. So now you're asking, you wanted some specifics. Well, I've got a new book coming out in January, and I'll talk about this in more detail. And I'm not supposed to talk about that book a lot now, but I'm just going to give one example of how the primal instincts that we're all vulnerable to are being targeted and weaponized to divide us. And this is something you can see this happen. You can see it happen really clearly. There was a book came out in 1971-72 by Saul Alinsky. Some people are very familiar with it. It's called Rules for Radicals. Mm-hmm. And There are so many facets of that book that we go into, but one of the most important that applies to what we're doing right now is he said, when you want to create radical change, he said, you pick a target, you isolate that target, you isolate it, you freeze it, and you polarize that target. Those 4 steps, you pick the target. So let's go back, let's take a look at this. Right around 2011, there was something called the Occupy movement. And it was based on something very real. There is a discrepancy between the rich and the poor, not just in America, in the world. All right. That's real. It needs to be talked about in a kind way. But what happened, it was weaponized to divide us. They picked the target, they froze that target, they isolated that, and all the media, every station, everybody was talking about this. And then they made it them against us. And that divided our society, began dividing our society in a way that we haven't been divided before. Then they took that same principle, blacks against whites. And George Floyd, they used George Floyd. And what happened, it was horrible. It was a tragedy that could have brought our nation together in a powerful way. It was weaponized to drive us apart. And that wedge is still there. Then we go back to what's happening in the Middle East. They did the same thing with the Islamic traditions and Muslims against Christians and Muslims against Jews. And you can see what's happening. Each time one of these targets is identified, there is a bond, a powerful bond that is broken in between family members at the dinner table, because the kids are watching their YouTube, their social media. Parents are watching theirs. Both of those social media are being regulated through the algorithms that feed. When you do a search, I just did this the other day. I was looking for a pickup truck, a Dodge Ram 1500 pickup truck, light duty pickup.
Sure.
And I did a search on this. All of a sudden, every time I bring up Yahoo, in the borders of Yahoo, I'm getting all of the ads for Dodge Ram 1500s. I'm getting emails from places, CarMax and everything. That's all of a sudden, I am flooded. My inbox is flooded. And if I didn't know better, I would think everybody else was looking at what I'm looking at, and everybody's seeing Dodge Ram 1500s, but they're not. These are called information silos. And these information silos, it's where the AI programs the algorithm to bring to you the information that matches what you search for, maybe once, maybe just once. And now it's everywhere. Now you go to the family dinner table and your kids, all right? And then the parents, they've got a different algorithm on their social media, and they're looking at something completely different. And maybe they did a search on Dodge Ram 1500 recalls, and they're saying, man, these are the worst vehicles ever. And the kids are saying, man, these are the best vehicles. This is exactly, it's happening in politics. It's happening. We're seeing it with our presidential election, climate. We're seeing it with the Second Amendment, gun control, everything. The net effect of all of this is that we're breaking the social bonds that hold a family together. The family's being destroyed successfully in many cases. Community is being destroyed in many cases. But I also want to say it's driving people to find new communities in different ways. So there's it's not all bad. I mean, right. we will respond to that breakdown by finding a way around the breakdown to build our community. But it's breaking families, it's breaking communities, it's breaking society. We're now watching it break a nation. America is being broken. And this is just one tactic of fifth generation warfare that is being used under the umbrella of the battle for our humanness between good and evil. So we covered, I don't even know what time we started. I know we just covered a lot of ground. We started late, but Will, does what I'm saying, does that make sense?
Of course, it obviously makes sense. As you can follow, I've been doing this nowhere near as long as you, but I've been taking bits and pieces of the knowledge, that gifted guests like you have been able to drop, into the podcast and in these discussions. And it's very clear I would hope, once again, being in my own information silo, I would hope that this is starting to reach out. I have a tendency to believe that things are different than they were when I grew up in the 90s, in that we have more people waking up to a world in which they're completely bombarded with information that they wanted you to think, like you called it programming, right? We were being programmed. It seemed at one point that we were being programmed so easily because there was one information silo, 5:30 news, and we got that, and then we went off in our little houses and we talked about that, and that was it. That's how we got our stuff, and things have changed, and the methods have changed, and all this stuff. And I just had a discussion with someone within our company. He's 20 or 21 years old, and the discussion was an hour. And he said, everything they taught me in school was kind of bullshit. Yeah. And he's having this awakening of learning about how nothing that they taught him necessarily, it was all one-sided, or it was all propaganda.
Sure. Well, you and I are both have music backgrounds and music foregrounds. We're both musicians. Yeah. And when you think about it, when I was growing up, 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a clear soundtrack for every year of my life where I can identify, and I still listen to them today. I can identify the music that carried us, that comforted us, that soothed us. And if I go down and talk to somebody else my age, they're going to know exactly that same song. Today, what is the soundtrack of this generation today? Well, the answer is there are so many independent and unique avenues to share the music that we don't have that common soundtrack. Some people are going to identify with Beyonce. Some people are going to identify with, it's whatever the media puts up there for us, Taylor Swift or whatever. It's what they put up there for us. Well, I'll have our favorite songs, but you're not going to find when the class of 2024 has their 20-year reunion and they play music, what they play for one person, another person's not going to relate to because of their musical information silos. So I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm saying we have to recognize it's different. It's way, way different. And so what I want to say about all of this, how do we transcend all of this? And the answer is so easy. What we're doing now is we're just giving a context. I lost my mom to COVID. And before she passed, it was obvious to her that something was very wrong in the world. And what she said to me, she said, well, her exact words, she said, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, which is a term that people of her generation used. I get the hell part. I'm not sure about the handbasket part. So, but what she meant was it seemed to her like the world was just coming apart at the seams for no apparent reason. And because there was no apparent reason, it was very frightening for her. And I imagine it is for a lot of people. So the reason that I think it's important to have this conversation, not to dwell on it, but to recognize there is a context, this ancient fundamental battle between good and evil. We have been in it all of our lives, and so have the generations before us. We are the product of only 10,000 generations of humans. We've only been here 200,000 years. 10,000, they say generations about 20 years. So 10,000 generations is how long we've been here. We've been in this battle. And we are obviously entering a new phase. Is it the end of the end? I don't know the answer to that. It has to be the end of what we've known because it's unsustainable. And that means it's the beginning of something new. So if we have that context, we could say, when we make our choices, we say, the choices I'm about to make, do they affirm life in the world and freedom, or do they deny life and freedom in the world? And the way that you triumph in a battle that is attempting to prevent you from being fully human is you simply live the best version of yourself. You love because you choose to love, and you love fearlessly without being afraid of what happens. When we love, we rarely, if you talk to someone and they're honest and you say, have you ever loved fully? Most people will say, I have been in love, and maybe it was a romantic, intimate relationship, or maybe it was with a friend or an animal or something. They'll say, I loved, but I didn't give 100% of my love. I held something back just in case. And that little inkling of fear is what our divinity frees us. It allows us to love freely and fully without the fear of what happens if it doesn't work. When we forgive, people say, "Oh yeah, man, I forgave my ex for betraying my trust," and he never acknowledged it. That we forgive, but we expect something to come back.
Mm-hmm.
In our divinity, we forgive for the sake of forgiving, without that expectation, because we become the best version of ourselves. When we can communicate freely, imagine freely, without fear of what we're imagining, create, innovate in our lives and in our world without fear, that is how you transcend. That's how you triumph, because you have overcome the fear that the evil wants to keep you less than your potential. There's biological evil that is replacing the human body. There's psychological evil. There's emotional evil. And it's all at our doorstep right now. And the thing that is, I think, most concerning to me, Will, is how mainstream media is leading our general population, my brothers and sisters in your family and my family, to normalize evil in our lives and to accept atrocities that we would never have accepted 20 years ago in our lives. And we're being led to, it's called normalcy bias, is one of the things that we're doing, a psychological term for it. For some people, it's when you see something so horrible, your emotions can't deal with it. And so you kind of average it out to make it into something that you can deal with. But we're being led to accept these things, and you see it everywhere. You know, I mean, I don't have to say, we've seen examples of it in music programs. We've seen examples of it in sports, global sports, in the Olympics, and what we saw happening in those ceremonies. And a lot of people don't recognize it, and some do and don't really care. It's not their thing. And it's all part of the big picture here. So the bottom line, what I would like, and I'm going to invite you, if you would do me a favor and not cut this up into TikTok segments that can be taken out of
context.
And now here's the reason. What we know is a lot of people are very fragile in the world right now. They're right on the edge because everything they've ever believed in is being taken from them, and they don't know what to cling to. And when they see bits and pieces of a conversation like this without the context, it can actually be damaging. So I appreciate you helping me to honor our brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, I mean, I know you have to run, and I just, obviously I want to thank you. You're a light in the world, and that's why I've enjoyed it. It's hilarious to me always that I make notes, just like I did last time, because there's a million things that I could want to talk to, because you're very knowledgeable on a whole bunch of things. I've got the Mysterious Kings list over here. We didn't even touch on that.
So what I did, I have another interview. I told them it was a soft, that we might run over. We can go to the bottom of the hour. We got 10 more minutes if you want to do 10 more minutes.
All right? I mean, it's a stark change. I wonder if I should save it for our next one and ask you one of the other questions just to keep it on.
You ask whatever is in your heart, brother.
I just feel like I want to give the Mysterious Kings list on some other day in ancient history. I'll give it its own podcast. Okay. And so you mentioned climate change, and obviously you mentioned the fact is that these changes are happening, but that they're not happening in the way that we are being told. And so my simple question is, what's really happening?
Yeah, this is a big conversation, and I'll do my very best in the limited time that we have. So I want to be really honest about this. As a geologist, we were giving people a heads up in the 1970s, saying that we need to prepare and adapt to the obvious changes that we can see in the geologic record, in the ice cores from Antarctica and from Greenland. We can see, first of all, that there are rhythms and cycles, number one. Number two, we can see where we are in those rhythms and cycles. And number three, we can see the impact of human existence, because we've only been here 200,000 years. So we haven't been here geologically. I mean, that's not a drop in the bucket. One of the first things that you see in those ice cores, and if I knew we were going to do this, I would have had the charts with us. you can see very clearly the rhythms of the temperatures rising and falling in geologic time. All right. And we are at a place where we should be in a warming trend. I would be concerned if we weren't warming. Are we the warmest that we've ever been? Absolutely not. The planet has been much, much warmer, and life continued to thrive than it is right now. Then you overlay that with the CO2 levels. And we're being told that the carbon dioxide increase is what causes the warming. The data doesn't support that, because when you look at the ice cores, what you see is that the warming happens first, and then the CO2 rises after it. I'm going to give you a mechanism for this in a moment, but this is what the data shows very clearly. CO2 levels, we're being told, I mean, literally, we've had politicians tell us the Earth is gone in 10 years. We've had people say that.
Yeah.
We had a president not long ago that said to us that the conversation is over, that it is sealed science, and there's no need to talk about it anymore. And this is a tactic that is used to frighten people into making choices. So when we look at the CO2, we have had times in Earth's history during, people are familiar with Jurassic Park. So the Jurassic period, during Cretaceous period, CO2 levels, right now, they're around 420, 430 parts per million. Are they higher than they have been in our lifetime? Yes. Are they higher than they have been in the 20th century? Yes. But the 20th century was at a low point in the CO2. We have had periods in our history, Jurassic, Cretaceous, we're looking at 1,000 parts per million, 2,000 parts per million. And here's what happens. The Earth is very green because that CO2 feeds the forest. The forests are lush and abundant. New forms of life emerged. The temperatures are globally warmer, a little warmer. And it's only a problem. It's only a problem for us because we built a civilization expecting that climate was static, that it would never change. So we built 30-story condos 10 feet from the edge of the ocean, thinking that it would always be 10 feet from the edge of the ocean. So we've been telling people since the 70s, we need to adapt to this. Now, what is it if it's not human fossil fuels that are doing this? We've had much higher, and by the way, temperature and CO2 aren't always related. We've had higher CO2 where the temperatures were low, and we've had places where the temperatures were high and the CO2 was low. So it's a very complex mix. So now I'm going to go big. I'm going to go big here. What the science, and the science is designed to be constantly updated. So what I'm saying to you now can be updated. It can change as we discover more. When you do a cross section of our planet, it's not a solid ball. I think most people know that. There are layers in the planet. The innermost part of our planet is called the core, and it is believed to be a solid iron nickel core. That's important. That's the magnetics. It's important with the magnetic fields. That's a solid core. The outer core around that is a molten core. All right. And then around that is the mantle. It's about 1,800 miles thick. And then our Earth's crust, it's only about 36 miles thick average on the whole planet. It's pretty thin, a pretty thin layer. What happens every once in a while is that inner core begins to change the way it rotates and its motion in a way that creates ripples in the outer core, in the molten outer core, that creates ripples in the mantle. And that mantle then begins in thin places in the Earth's crust, which is only 36 miles average anyway. Thin places, that mantle begins to extrude onto the surface. What you see is an increase in earthquakes, an increase in volcanic activity at plate boundaries, which is exactly 7.8 on the Richter scale. The earthquakes in Turkey, India, Pakistan, those are triple plate bound. 3 plates come together right there. Yellowstone National Park, they're closing parts of the park because the geysers are behaving abnormally, and they're concerned that something is going to give. Shasta. And St. Helens, Mount St. Helens is becoming active again. These are all exactly what you would expect. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What's changing that inner core Told you we're going to go cosmic here. Every moment of every day, we've got cosmic rays hitting this planet, hitting your body, hitting my body, and the atoms are so far apart, we're mostly empty space. And those cosmic rays, they go right through us, not a problem, don't cause a problem at all. They go right through the crust, don't cause a problem. They go right through the mantle, don't cause a problem. They go right through the outer core, don't cause a problem. The inner core is dense iron, nickel, under the temperatures and the pressure at the center of our planet. When those particles hit, they don't go through, and they begin to heat that inner core. And that is one of the things that causes all of the effects that I've just explained. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The cosmic rays that come to us appear to come in volleys over very precise periods of time, about every 26,000 years from the center of our Milky Way. And because of the distance and the speed of light and the speed of energy, it takes about 26,000 years. So we are now in the process, and this is what the Mayans, apparently in their calendar, this is why they were so concerned to give us a heads up. We are experiencing that 26,000 year cycle that is causing all of this. Now, I promised I'd come back to CO2. When that magma from the mantle comes up under the crust to the thin places, well, the ocean floor is way thinner than where Everest is, where you've got, a mountain all the way down to the bottom of the crust. So the mantle begins to warm the ocean from underneath. And this is exactly, you're seeing the glaciers are melting from underneath. They're not melting from on top because of the atmosphere, they're melting from underneath. And I spent some time studying this. I don't want to get really technical, but it's interesting that the surface the air temperature can only warm the oceans down to very specific levels. And the heat that is warming the oceans is coming from lower. So here's why this is important. High school science. Cooler water, salt water, the oceans are saline, cooler salt water hold more carbon dioxide. And the oceans absorb much of the carbon dioxide that's produced on the planet, as well as the forests. When those oceans warm, they can't hold as much carbon dioxide. They release it into the atmosphere. And NASA, you go to the NASA website, and they'll say over 90% of the CO2 is coming from the oceans. They acknowledge that. They don't acknowledge why the oceans are warming, but they do say that it's coming from the oceans. So we're living this cycle that has been hijacked and weaponized and distorted by going to our humanness, our vulnerable primal instincts. When we see someone suffering because of a fire in Northern California or Hawaii, people lose their homes, sometimes they lose their lives, say, my God, that's horrible. We want to help them. And then the narrative turns and says, well, it's your fault because you're burning fossil fuels. And it's that guilt then that drives people to make political changes that for reasons that aren't necessarily supported by the science. Now, there's a caveat to everything I'm saying. And I know for some people, they've never heard this. And for other people, they don't like perhaps what I'm saying. We definitely need to stop burning fossil fuels. And here's the kicker. We've had the technology to do it for over 70 years. If the powers that be were serious, if they were really serious, if the nations, the governments, the United Nations, those organizations, if they were really serious about benevolent change to help people rather than the political and the financial change, they would unleash the technology that we've had for over at least 70 years. And I'm not talking about Tesla. This isn't Tesla technology. These are other forms of technology that we have had that produce clean, green, sustainable energy that cannot be weaponized into a nuclear weapon, that cannot be, can't melt down like a Fukushima reactor, with materials that are abundant in the Earth's crust. Every nation has them. They're inexpensive. You can't charge what you charge for oil. And the other piece of this, Will, is that oil is so precious. And as a geologist, I'm fascinated by this. It is one of the few components that we cannot replicate in the lab. You cannot artificially make petroleum. That's important because even if we stop burning it, we use it in over 6,000 applications in our lives every day that we don't even think about. You and I and our audience could not be having this conversation if petroleum was not a big part of our lives, because of the components in the computers, the wires, the cables. People say, well, what about solar and wind? What people don't know is it takes fossil fuel energy to produce the silica that is used in the solar panels. It doesn't occur naturally. It takes fossil fuels to make the aluminum frames or the stainless steel frames, and to make the concrete and to pump the water. It's so precious. We need to stop burning it because we need it in medical supplies, in tubes, and plastics that we use to keep us alive, in hospital conditions. There's nothing that we do in our lives that is not impacted by petroleum, and it's been demonized, and young people are now afraid of it and they hate it because of the narrative, when in truth, it is a blessing and it can free us. And if we want to stop burning it, we could do it in a heartbeat if those technologies were made available. And I think we'll see this in our lifetimes. So I just wanted to have that caveat. We definitely need to go green, clean, green, sustainable, and solar and wind is not the way to do it. Because people don't realize, when we talk about solar and wind or batteries, those, and I love all of them, and there's a place for all of them, not for every human on the face of the earth to power their civilization, because they are made of 17 they're called rare earth elements. 17 rare earth elements go into computer chips, solar panels, batteries. The cobalt from the batteries comes mostly from Democratic Republic of Congo. Unregulated child labor. I mean, if you ever see the films, those kids are barefoot in t-shirts and shorts in this toxic water in the mines, digging with their bare hands into the earth for the ore that will be converted into the cobalt that they will then sell to China, that China will then convert into the batteries that they'll sell into the West. It's horrible what's happening. Amnesty International, UNICEF, they've all done studies on this. People don't like to think about that. So it's not sustainable. And they are finite sources of energy in countries that aren't our closest friends. They may not be the most reliable sources if things get bad. So these are stepping stones, bridges, but they're not the ultimate answer. And there's a narrative out there that says that they are, and that we're being taught to fear and hate carbon. And the people that suffer the most from that are the people that have the least bandwidth to suffer, that don't have the money for the alternatives, when in fact energy can be available to them inexpensively, or in some cases at no cost, if we did this the way that's possible to do it. So I just wanted to say that. I know it's a very different way of thinking. My YouTube channel, I've got a lot of videos with details if you want details on all this stuff. I didn't know we were going to go here in our conversation today, but it was a good conversation.
As always. And if the chart, I mean, we'll link obviously everything that you have going on, from events to your YouTube channel and other things. If those charts are something that you think can be added, we will have our guys throw it up there,
Yeah, we can. They're on the YouTube videos as well. Let me see what I can find this afternoon. But I'm just going to acknowledge we covered a lot of ground. For some people, it may be new material. For some people, it may be uncomfortable to hear some of this. And what I want to say is, I'll just look right in the eyes of my family here. If you're on the planet right now, you're here because of what we're doing right now. It is so rare for a civilization to birth a new civilization. And it takes one very strong generation with a strong soul compass to recognize the gift of their humanness and to allow that gift to be reflected in the choices they make of science and technology and politics and society. The bottom line for me is we're all being invited to step up and live the best version of ourselves, be healthier than we've ever been, emotionally, physically, psychologically, mentally, spiritually, and to allow that health to be reflected in the choices and the values that we stand for in our lives. And if we do that, we can't go wrong. We're living in a world that's unsustainable, and it has to change. We get to choose. Do we make that change with a soft landing, or do we make it rough for everyone? And we're answering that question through the choices that we make in our lives every day. So maybe next time we'll do Will and Gregg part 3, I guess.
Part 3.
We'll look back and see where we've come from this last conversation. Hopefully
in a better state. That's all we can ask. Gregg, thank you as always. Can't wait for the next one, and I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your trust. I'm realizing I did most of the talking today, and I hope I didn't step on your toes in any way by doing that.
Not at all. Not at all. It's what I want, you know? So,
okay. All right, brother. Well, thank you for the hub of a community that you're creating. I'm going to check this out. When will this come up?
This will either be out. Today is Thursday. It's most likely coming out next week.
Oh man, you fast. You guys are fast.
Oh yeah. We want Gregg out there as soon as we can, you know?
Okay. Well, I'm going to click on it and give it a thumbs up.
All right, please do. Please do.
All right. I love you, brother. And I love what you do. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next.
All right. See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.